Hello, and welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, the United Ronin Networks. My name is Ralph Anthony Garcia, also known as R4, the legal, the loyal, the regal, the royal Ronin Ralph, your master of ceremonies. I would like to take this moment to tell you folks thank you for joining me on Ralph Reads, and to please tell a friend to like, share, comment, and subscribe to TURN, the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. On this edition of Ralph Reads, I present to you the next to last episode of Iceberg Slim's Pimp, the story of my life. Let the reading commence. Chapter 16, Away from the Track. They locked me up in Central Jail. At dawn, a jail trustee brought a basket of bologna sandwiches down a line of cells. A moment later, another trustee brought a gigantic kettle of black stinking chicory. I passed up the delicacies. The tiny cell was too small for 2 men. 8 of us were in it. I was lying on the concrete floor. I was using my rolled-up Benny as a pillow. My lid shielded my eyes from the bright bare bulb in the corridor. My cellmates were bums and junkies. 2 of them were getting sick. They were puking all over. The bums were stinking almost as bad as the junkies. A drunk lying beside me dug his fingernails into his scalp and crotch over and over. He scratched his back against the floor. He had to be lousy. It was rough going for a pimp, all right. I thought, if someone had told me a year ago I'd be back in the shithouse, I'd have thought he was nuts. Christ, I hope nothing happens to Chris. She's the only link to the outside I can trust to get my clothes and scratch. I know after she calls and can't get me at the pad, she'll check out all the shithouses. It's a good thing I'm not in the federal lockup at county jail. Here, she can grease a mitt and see me. I hope she makes it before the U.S. Marshal shows to move me. At 9, the turnkey came and called out my name. I went to the cell door. He looked hard at me through the bar. He twisted the cell lock open. I stepped out into the corridor and followed him. He took me to a break-proof glass window with a speaking hole in it. I saw Chris on the other side of it. She was crying. I couldn't blame her. I felt like crying with her. I bent down and put my mouth to the hole. She stuck an ear against it on her side. I said, "Baby, there's nothing to cry about. You're daddy's brave bitch, remember? Now listen, I want you to give the copper at the property desk a double saw or so for the key to my pad. I want you to get my scratch out of the sleeve of my green trench coat, rent a safe deposit box, then move my stuff to your hotel. The feds are gonna take me back to Wisconsin. They call it the point of origin for the runt's beef. They'll set a bond for me there. I'll get a slick lip in Wisconsin. Baby, you keep checking. Get to Wisconsin a day before I do with the scratch. I'll need it for the lip and bail, understand, sugar? Once I get bail, I'll get our stable back and beat this rap." I took my jib from the hole and put my horn there. She said,
"Daddy, I'll do everything the way you say. I understand. Daddy, I'll go and get the key to your latest hideout. Where did you move? I thought you were going to wait for my call."
It didn't register. Maybe I was cracking up under all the strain and grief. Maybe I had moved before I got busted. I raised my head and looked at her. Her eyes were questioning. I pointed my index finger at the hole. I decided to risk my theory that I hadn't moved. I said, "Chris, goddammit, I haven't moved. All my stuff is still on West Avenue. Now come on, girl. This is not the time for jokes from Daddy's witty bitch. You knocked on the door. I wasn't there. Naturally, I couldn't be. I was down here." She said,
Daddy, I didn't have to knock. The door was wide open. Both trunks and all the suitcases were gone. In fact, the only thing left was your hairbrush. I put it in my purse. Daddy, all this is too much for me. I must be losing my mind.
I stood there, glaring hate at her. Her eyes were wide, staring at me. I thought, poison or sweet has stolen this Judas bitch from me. I'm in the cross. One of them has rehearsed this bitch. She's a son of a bitch and actress. A sucker looking at that innocent look she's got would have to buy the con. I hate this bitch more than I do the runt. If I could just get my hands around her throat, I'd love to see her tongue turned black, flopping across her chin. Well, I can't croak her through that glass wall, no matter what. I've gotta stay Iceberg. I can't let her take back a chump emotional scene to report. She and her new man are not gonna get their kicks at my expense. I turned and walked away from her. I saw the turnkey at the far end of the corridor with his back to me. Good thing for me, he hadn't been close enough to lock me back in the cell right away. I was 20 feet from her when it exploded in my skull. I thought, it's the skinny flunky. It's the bastard that saw me get busted. He rushed back and sprang that spring latch. I gotta go back to Chris and really play some game. If she gets hip, I don't trust her, she'll blow for sure. She's the only stick I got to fight with. I turned back toward her. She was still standing there. She was crying harder than before. I walked to the glass and spoke into the hole. I said, "Chris, a joker in the building saw me get busted. He cleaned me out. Baby, we've been so close. I had a crazy thought that if you'd been there, I wouldn't have been robbed. What the hell, sugar? I'm the bastard that kept you away. It wasn't your fault at all. Christ, I'll be glad when this is over. Give a lip here in town a half a yard or so. Have him come to county jail and bring me whatever papers are needed to sell the hog. Get the slip on the hog from the property desk. It's in my wallet. We should get $2,500 or so for it. Bring that scratch and all you can hump up onto Wisconsin." They moved me to Wisconsin. Chris came to county jail there and put $3,000 in my jail account. Mama came to see me. She was in pieces. She thought the government was going to give me 50 years. At my hearing, bail was set at $20,000. A bondsman put up the face amount. His fee was 2 G's. I got the state's best criminal lip. I gave him a G retainer. Chris and I went back to the track. I stayed out on bail for 4 months. I had 2 turnouts and 3 seasoned whores during that time. None stayed longer than a month. Everybody in the street knew about that rap over my head. I guess the whores didn't want to fatten the frog for snakes. Sweet and I didn't see much of each other. I didn't feel close to him anymore. I was a pimp on the skids. Poison was top pimp. Every slat I got my hands on, I wired to the lip. I had to. I was getting one continuance after another. Finally, I went to trial. The runt and Ophelia were there. They were afraid to look at me. They gave the government a penitentiary case, all right. They grinned at each other when I got 18 months. Mama fainted. Chris boo-hooed. I had a good lip, though. With the counts against me, I could have gotten 10 years. Chris went back to the track. She swore she'd stick until I got out. Leavenworth was what the government called a Class A joint. It was big and escape-proof. It was run by master psychologists. There was no screw brutality. It wasn't necessary. The invisible mental shackles were subtle but harder than the steel bars. Alcatraz was the grim trump the officials held over our heads. It was a joint of con cliques. The most dangerous clique was the Southern cons. They hated Negroes. I had references as a cell house orderly from other joints. I got a spot in the cell house with mostly pimps, dope dealers, and stick-up men. I was out at night until 10, exchanging newspapers and magazines for the cons. I'd been in the joint about 6 months. I stopped in front of a cell to rap to a pimp pal. He was excited and standing, gripping the bars of his cell door. He was a yellow version of Top. They call him Doll Baby. He said,
"Berg, you told me I couldn't steal the beautiful bitch. Well, the bitch sent me a kite this morning. She's transferring to the shoe shop. I already got the spot picked out where I could sock it into her. I told you that square-ass peckerwood she's got couldn't outplay me. That bitch is 4 bills on the books. She's getting me a big order on commissary this week. Shit, on the street or in the joint, it's all the same to pimpin' Doll Baby."
I had seen the beautiful bitch. He was a lanky white boy with watery blue eyes and bleached corn silk hair. A fat, red-faced Southern con was madly in love with him. The beautiful bitch would lie in the fat con's arms in the yard and pick at the pimples on his face. The con was feared by everyone. He was the leader of a treacherous band of Southern cons. I said, "Doll, you better cut that bitch loose. Her old man is from Mississippi. He's a cinch to cut your heart out in that yard. He can't let a nigger steal his broad. Take my advice, pal. I like you. You only got a year to go." The next time on the yard, I saw Doll and his bitch billing and cooing on the grass. They didn't see any of the ball game. The game was over. The fat con and his band of Southern shiv men had been evil-eyeing Doll's show. I was 50 yards back of Doll when it happened. Hundreds of cons were pressed together, filing from the bleachers and playing field. I saw Doll throw up his hands and scream. He disappeared. The gray tide moved on. 3 screws were standing over him. He was on his back. Blood was gushing from his open mouth. Blood seeped from holes in his jacket. He lived, but he had a bitch of a time making it. He stayed bitchless for the rest of his bit. Chris stopped sending me scratch or anything. I got a wire she'd squared up and married a Pullman porter. She even had a baby. I wondered if the sucker knew what a boss bitch he had. I was filing out to sick call one morning. A group of cons on the other side of the road was filing to work. I saw a con marching behind a dark-complexioned con raise, something that glinted in the sun. It was a shiv. He was chopping away at the con. Finally, the con folded dead. Screws rushed up and took the hatchet man away. I was 2 months from release. I had stopped to rap to an old con forger who knew sweet. He was shooting the breeze about stick-up men and how they stacked up in the skull department with pimps and con men. We were rapping loud. I knew the night screw was at his desk 4 tiers down on the ground floor. I said, "Pops, a stick-up man is gotta be nuts. The stupid bastard maybe passes a grocery store. He sees the owner checking his till. Right away, a stupid idea flashes inside his crazy skull. That's my scratch. Maybe the grocer is a magician or an ex-acrobat with a degree in karate, worse, an ex-marine. The silly son of a bitch doesn't realize the awful odds. He ain't got enough in his dim skull to think about the trillion human elements. Any one of them can put him in his grave. The suicidal son of a bitch maybe has his back to the street with his rod and his mitt. Pops, the stick-up man is champ lunatic in the underworld. Pops agreed, and I walked away down the tier. I heard a hiss from the cell next to Pops. A new transfer was standing at his cell door. He was skinny with a rat face. I stopped. He was sneering at me. His hands were trying to crush the rolled steel bars. He stuttered, You lousy pimp motherfucker! You pussy-eating son of a bitch! You ain't going to live your bit out! I went fast to get a rundown on the nut from a stud on the tier below. He said, "Aw, Berg, I hope you haven't crossed that dizzy bastard. He croaked a stud in Lewisburg. They hung 50 on him. He's a heist man. Better watch him close. He's a cinch to make the Rock or Looney Bin." It was a week later, just after the cell house filed out to the shops. The cell house screw had signaled sick call. I was standing in the back of the cell house on the flag. I was lighting a cigarette to smoke before I started mopping and waxing the flag. Somewhere above me, an excited voice shouted, "Look out, Bird!" I looked up and chilled. A plummeting shadow flashed like black lightning in my eyes. I heard a whooshing whistle as it scraped gently against the cloth of my shirt at the tip of my shoulder. A dozen cymbals clashed as it grenaded against the flagstone at my side. I looked down. A steel mop wringer lay in 3 pieces. There was a roar-scratched crater in the flagstone. Its outline was like a head shrinker's blot. I stared at it and idly wondered what the prison head shrinker could make of it. He was a slick joker. Months ago, he had told me, "Pimps have deep mother hatred and severe guilt feelings." I looked up. It wouldn't take a head shrinker to figure this one. The rat-faced heist man was grinning down at me. He was on his gallery on the 4th tier near the ceiling. He had stayed for sick call to bomb my skull off. The crater symbol was easy. Rat-face hated pimps without guilt feelings tied in. That night, I took a pack of butts to the con who had screamed out the warning to me. The nutty bomber went to solitary. 2 weeks later, he tried to gut a con with a shiv made from a file. They shipped him to the Rock. I was ecstatic to see him go. During my bit, I had read the second cell house full of books. I had read mountains of books on psychiatry, psychology, and the psychoneurosis. I couldn't have done a smarter thing. I'd have to be my own head shrinker when the white folks entomb me for a year in that steel casket in the future. I got all my good time. I was released in the early spring of 1947. I stopped off at Mama's for a week. Then I went back to the fast track. I had 60 slats and the joint vine on my back. The clothes I'd bought while on bail were with Chris. Maybe her Pullman Porter was my size. Anyway, I wasn't going to do a Dick Tracy for a few used vines. Sweet was still in the penthouse. He had blown down to only 3 whores. Poison had made a bad pimping blunder. He had turned out a white square and put his foot in her ass. It was the last straw for the downtown brass. They bounced him off the force. He had 1 whore. He bird-dogged her. He took his scratch off after every trick like a chili pimp. I rented a pad by the week. I was in the same slum district where the flunky had beat me for my role in clothes. I had no flash and glamour, no pimp front. I was just another pimp down on his luck. I was starving for a whore. In the pimp's life, yesterday means nothing. It's how you are doing today. A pimp's fame is as fleeting as an icicle under a blowtorch. The fine young whores are wild to hump for a pimp in the chips. A pimp in bad shape can't get the time of day from them. A pimp's wardrobe has to be spectacular. His wheels must be expensive and sparkling new. I had to get the gaudy tools to start pimping again. Chapter 17. Trying a New Game. I had 3 choices. I could cop a piece of stuff on consignment from a contact I had made in a joint. I could peddle at retail and get 9 or 10 grand in weeks. I could take a dog, a broken down whore with trillions of mileage on her. Maybe I could keep my foot in her ass and grind up a bankroll. I decided to take the third out, do a slick fast hustle. I met a pimp named Red Eye in the junkie joint. He had just finished a state bit the week before. He was whoreless like me and itching to pimp again. We were crying on each other's shoulder at the bar. He said, "Ice, ain't it a bitch? No matter how much pimp a stud is, these dizzy bitches demand he's got a front. But I got an idea. Ice, you're a hell of a actor, and you can rap good as a con man. I know a stud who's hip to every smack peddler and fence on the west side. I got a rod and a real copper's shield. All we need is a short and a third stud to drive. Neither one of us is well known over here. Besides, there's a flock of youngsters dealing now who were squares when we left the track. I'm a roller type stud. With the weight you put on in the joint, you'd make a perfect copper. Ice, if we only knock over 3 of them, we split maybe 10 to 15 G's between us. Our finger man is a junkie punk. We give him and the driver peanuts. Ice, those 47 hogs are a pimp's dream. I gotta have one. What do you say? Are you in?" I said, "Red Eye, I'll go for it. I sure as hell ain't gonna put a mop in my hand out here. I don't have wheels, but I've got a little scratch. I'll spring to rent a short. You know someone with one? How about a driver?" He said, "Ice, lay a double saw on me to cop a short. I know a stud for the driver. Meet me right here in this joint tomorrow night at 9. We can take off our first mark." I said, "Don't crack my name to that driver. Call me Tom, Frank, anything." I didn't get 2 hours sleep that night. It worried me to be part of a hustle that required a ride. I thought, maybe I'd better back out. I could maybe find a young hash slinger in a greasy spoon. I could turn her out in a hurry. She'd be a long shot for stardom. At least she'd make enough scratch for chump expenses. You can't start pimping with a turnout. It never works out. A pimp with no whore and no bankroll is a sucker to try to turn out on a mulish square broad. No, I guess the Red Eye deal is all I got. Red Eye got to the joint at 10:30. The driver was a huge stud with a rapper like a girl's. I noticed his big meat hooks shaking on the steering wheel on our way to the west side. Red Eye ran down our first mark. His light maroon eyes were whirling. He had a skull full of H. He said, "Paul, our first mark is a bird's nest on the ground. It's a broad. The finger showed her to me last night. She and her old man got the best smack on the west side. It's so good, studs from all over town are rushing the cop every night. He and the broad deal out of a bar 3 blocks from their pad. They deal mostly in 8s and 16ths. On a weekend night like this one, they take off maybe 5 G's. The stud has got a rep as a fast rod joker. He ain't got no direct syndicate connections as far as I know. We ain't got to worry about him tonight. He's a New York cop in a supply. The broad will leave the bar around midnight loaded with scratch. She'll have a few packs of smack on her, too, for the evidence to shake her. Her real name is Mavis Sims. She's gonna go to her short parked behind the bar. She ain't afraid of being heisted. Everybody is scared shitless of her old man. She's got a small rod strapped to her thigh. She ain't gonna pull it on the police, though. That's us, strange rollers from downtown. We gotta move fast on her when she hits that lot behind the bar. She's a slick bitch. We gotta be real rollers. We can't wake her up with fakes. She's a strong bitch. I have to blow a hole in her if she reached for a rod. There will be a pack of hard studs in the bar. They will love to croak us on that lot to please her old man. We gotta move her fast out of the neighborhood to play her out of the scratch. We gotta be careful the rollers don't join our party. Her old man is doing a lot of greasing in the district. Perry is gonna park our short in the street beside the lot. We arrest the broad and you play on her while Perry drives. I ain't gonna rap. Ice, after we cop her, it's up to you for the shake. You got to convince her. Perry was really nervous. He pulled into the curb next to the bar lot. His skull was jiggling on his bull neck like he had Parkinson's shakes. I was silent. Red Eye's rundown had me wondering how it shaped up as a bird's nest to him. It looked like maybe a bird's nest for Dillinger. If the mark hadn't been abroad, I'd have split and got on an L train. I wondered if she'd seen me before I went to the joint. What if she made me right away as Iceberg and plugged me in the skull? Her old man might have outfit friends. If he did, we'd be found in an alley with our balls rammed down our throats. We were standing in the shadows 10 feet from the broad short. I said, "Red, I better take the rod. When we step out on her, shine the flashlight right in her eyes." She was walking fast when she came into the lot. Her light blue chiffon dress was billowing in the April breeze. She was walking wide-legged like a whore after a long night in a $2 house. My legs were trembling like a stud dog's hung up in a bitch. I looked down at the badge pinned to my wallet in my palm. It glittered like molten silver in the moonlight. The .32 pistol in my right hand weighed a sweaty ton. She was twirling a keyring. In the utter silence, the clinking sounded like the U.S. Marshal's handcuffs. She had her hands on the door handle. I stepped out of the shadows. Red Eye was behind me. I wondered if she could hear my ticker hammering. Red Eye put the light in her face. Her yellow forehead wrinkled in surprise. Her sexy jib flapped open. I grabbed her wrist and tried to crush it. I roared, "Police! What's your name? And why are you sneaking around back here?" She stammered,
Gloria Jones, and I was coming to my car. I always park it here. Now get out of the way. I'm going home. The captain of this district is a personal friend of my husband's.
Red Eye had turned off the flashlight and moved behind her. She was looking down at the badge. She was trying to yank her wrist free. I said in a low, heavy voice, "You lying, dope-peddling bitch! Your real moniker is Mavis Sims. We're from downtown. Your old man's no pal of ours. We're gonna bust you, bitch. I'll lay odds we've caught you dirty. Come on, bitch, before we get rough. Anything I hate, it's a stinking smack dealer." We hurled her into the back seat of our short. Red got in beside her. I was up front with Perry. I turned facing the rear seat. There was silence as Perry drove out of the district towards central headquarters. Miss Sims was squirming in the seat. Her right hand was out of sight behind her. She was getting very jerky. I remembered that rod she was carrying. I started to shake. I said, "Al, this suspect is acting peculiarly. Perhaps you better pull over. She might have concealed some evidence behind the seat." He pulled over. Red moved toward her. She slid to the window on the other side. She said,
"Officers, I'm clean. It's worth 50 apiece to cut me loose. If you bust me, I'll be out in an hour. Take me back to the bar. I can get the 150 from the bar owner."
I said, "No dice, sister. We got specific orders to bring you in. Now, don't make him slap a broad around. He's going to frisk you. He don't have to wait for a matron to do it downtown. It's proper if he thinks you're armed and we're in danger." He patted the inside of her thighs. It was there, a .22 automatic jammed under the top of her stocking. He took it out and shoved it in his pocket, searched her bosom, purse, shoes, and hair. She was sure clean, except for the rod. I felt like a real chump. All this trouble for nothing. He was scratching his chin. The junkie punk had put a bum finger on the broad. I was at the point of shoving her out. Then it struck me. Where did my street whores hide their scratch? In the cat. In the cat. Where the fuck else? The clincher was this broad's wide-legged walk. I had noticed it on the lot. She was leaning forward, staring at Perry's face. I said, "Joe, it's gotta be up her cat. Bitch, stretch out and put your legs across his lap." She said,
"The hell I will. You phony niggas ain't rollers. That big one at the wheel used to bounce at Mario's."
She was wise. The double saw I gave Red Eye had tapped me out. We had to know if she had treasure up her cat. I wondered how he'd handle it. I didn't wonder long. He turned brute. He punched her hard in the nose. It was like he had cut her throat. Blood splattered over the front of her dress. I felt the light spray on my face. She opened her mouth to scream. He smothered it with a terrible slam to the gut. She went limp. He pulled her across him. He darted his paw between her legs. When he brought his mid out, it made a kissing sound. He had a long, shiny plastic tube between his index and middle fingers. It stank like rotten fish. The broad was moaning and holding both hands to her nose. He unwrapped the package. The pouch was bursting with scratch. In the center of the roll, I saw the cellophane edges of packaged dope. He got out and opened the door on the broad side. He dragged her out to the sidewalk. He got in the front seat. Perry gunned away. I kept a sharp eye on Red Eye as he counted the scratch in his lap. Red Eye and I netted $2,000 apiece. Red Eye took the packages of H. The broad dealer had 4,400 in the pouch. Perry and the junkie finger man got 2 bills apiece. It was a week before we tried for the second mark. We shouldn't have. He was a reefer peddler and fence. We thought he had big scratch on him. We didn't have a driver. We had the mark in the short. Red Eye was driving. We were playing the peel off. The mark was in the back seat. I was in the front seat. I asked for his identification. He handed me his hide. I saw it had only a few slats in it. We were pulling to the curb to search him. A 2-man squad car passed. The mark saw them and started screaming. They stopped and dragged Red Eye and me out to the street. They kicked and beat the hell out of us. They took us down. The mark was slick. Right there on the street, he cracked. He took a C-note from him. If he'd known about our role, He could have beefed for 4 G's. The rollers saw our rolls and tried to pin every stick-up on the books against us. We went on every show-up for a week. We didn't get a finger. They booked us for armed robbery of the mark. Chapter 18. Jailbreak. An agent for a fixer came to the lockup. He assured us we could avoid 5 to 10 for armed robbery. We could get the charge reduced to a workhouse bit for a price. We tapped out and got a year apiece in the workhouse. It was like a prison, only tougher. A joint is always rough when there's graft and corruption. Only cons with scratch are treated and fed like human beings. The walls were just as high. Most of the inmates were serving short 30 and 90-day bits. The joint was filthy. The food was unbelievable. The officials had an unfunny habit of putting pimps on the coal pile. I did a week on it. I was ready to make a blind rush at the wall. Maybe I could claw up the 30 feet before I got shot. I was really desperate. After the first week, I came out of shock. I started thinking about a sensible way to escape. I just couldn't get my skull in shape for another bit. It was too soon after the last one. By the middle of the second week, I had a dozen ideas. None of them stood up under second thoughts. I shared a tiny cell with a young con. He was only 18. He idolized me. He heard about me in the streets. I slept on the top of a double bunk. There were 3 counts. 1 in the morning, 1 after night lockup, the 3rd at midnight. One night I missed standing up for count at the cell door. I was so beat from heaving coal, I'd collapse on my bunk. I woke up an hour later after the count. It gave me an idea. I kicked it around in my skull. Like all good ideas, it kept growing, crying out for my attention. I thought, I wonder how much and what of me that Screw saw when he counted me. I tested him 3 nights in a row. I'd lie on the bunk when he came through the count. Each time I'd lie so he saw less of me. The last time he counted me there was only my back, rear end, and legs visible to him. I got excited. I knew it would be easy to get extra pants and a shirt. I could stuff them into a passable dummy. I knew my first problem was to find a way to get out of line when filing from the coal pile. My second problem was I couldn't leave a dummy in position in the cell during the day. Cell house cons and screws would pass on the gallery and discover it. I decided to solve my outside problem first. At the end of the day, a screw would line us up at the coal pile to be counted. We would then file 200 yards into the mess hall for supper. After supper, we would file through the hallways to the cell house for count. There were several cell houses. All of the cell houses phoned in their tallies to the office. If all the tallies equaled that number of cons in the entire joint, then the count was right. A loud whistle blew and the day screws could go home. There was no cover between the coal pile and the mess hall. A screw with a scoped, high-powered rifle manned a wall that ran parallel to our line of march. It looked impossible. I lost hope. On my 28th day in the joint, I noticed something. I had been on an official pass-out of some kind. It was very near supper time. I passed the dressing station and shower room. The front door was open. I glanced in. In the rear of it, a screw was hook-locking a wooden door. I stopped and pretended to tie my shoe. He then walked up 2 or 3 stairs and swung a steel door shut inside the shower room. He started lining up his cons for the march to the dining room. I had noticed the shed before on the marches of the dining room. It was maybe 30 feet from the line of march. The door has always been shut. I had thought it stayed locked all the time. I couldn't have checked it with that rifleman on the wall and a screw marching with me. In the cell that night, I was as excited as a crumb crusher at Christmas time. I thought, maybe that shower screw sometimes forgets to lock that shed door. Maybe he's even later locking it than today. I couldn't see what the hell was in the shed. I know there's got to be old clothing or something I can hide under when he comes to hook that slammer. I gotta get out of this joint. I can't pull my bit here. If the kid will handle my dummy end, I'll take a chance. I'm gonna talk to my cellmate about that dummy. If he'll help me, I can escape like a shadow. I looked down over the rim of my bunk at him. I had written several bullshit letters for him to his girlfriend. So far, they had kept her writing and sending him candy and cigarette money. He was a good kid. I didn't think he'd rat. I said, "Shorty, what if I told you I could beat this joint?" He said, "Iceberg, you're jiving. You can't make it out of here. There are 5 steel gates between this cell and the streets. How you planning to do it?" I said, "Kid, as beautiful as it is, I can't do it without your help. Now here it is." I ran it down to him. At first, he was leery. I told him to take the dummy from the floor under his bunk, put it on mine. As soon as the whistle blew, unstuff the shirt and pants. Put the blanket stuffing back on my bunk. Sometime during the night before the midnight count, throw the pants and shirt over the gallery to the flagstone. When the midnight hell broke loose, he'd be clean. No one could prove or even suspect he had dismantled the dummy. I asked him to give me the name of a relative of record. I told him I would send him a C-note from the first horror scratch I got. I got his promise to handle the cell end of the plan. An hour later, I gave a cell house orderly 2 packs of butts for an extra blanket. I had the stuffing. I took my shirt and pants and stuffed them for rehearsal. He sat at the cell door with a mirror watching the gallery both ways. In 20 minutes, he had the position and the rest of it down pat. I didn't close my eyes all night. At midnight, I saw the screw counting heads. He was due for a shock soon. I knew that if something went wrong, they'd probably beat me to death out there on the yard. I had to go through with it. No con misses his freedom more than a pimp. His senses are addicted to silky living. I took packs of butts to the coal pile the next day. A yard runner got me a shirt and pants. I put them on over the ones I wore. The night in the cell, I made up the dummy. I put it under the kid's bunk and gave him a pep talk until midnight. I even promised him I'd keep in touch when he got out and I'd teach him the pimp. I thought the last day on the coal pile would never end. I would be sunk if there was a routine cell house shakedown. Finally, we lined up. My throat was dry and my knees were wobbly. We were approaching that shed. The screw on the wall walked 20 paces away, then about faced and walked back facing the coal pile gang. I'd have to break for the shed when he walked away. I'd have to be in there when he turned if it wasn't locked. If he didn't shoot me, the yard screws would beat me to a pulp. The coal pile screw was ahead of me. He could turn and look back at any moment. No other moment in my life has been so tense, so wildly adventuresome. I didn't even know if there was a fink in the line. I tell you, it was something. If my ticker had been faulty, I'd have passed out. The screw on the wall was walking away. The shed seemed miles away. I slipped out of the line and raced for it. I could hear an excited whispering from the cons behind me. I touched the shed door handle. For an instant, I hesitated. I was afraid I'd find it locked. My sweat-hot hands pulled it toward me. It was open. Just before I stepped inside, I looked up at the wall. The screw was standing looking in the direction of the shed. I shut the door. Had he seen me? I looked around the shed. There was nothing to hide under or behind. I could hear the cons in the shower room. They were getting ready for supper. The steel door was half open. That screw will be out at any second to hook the shed door. There was no place to hide. It had been all for nothing. I heard a voice and the scrape of feet at the steel door. The screw was coming out into the shed. I looked up at the shed ceiling. I looked over the steel door. There was a line of rusty bars a foot long over the door flush against my grimy window. I leapt up and grabbed two of them. I swung my feet and legs up just as the screw walked in to lock the door. I was jackknifing my legs just 6 inches from the top of the blue uniform cap. I hung there like a bat. I held my breath. He passed beneath me. I saw flakes of rust fall from the bars onto the top of his cap. It seemed forever to my agonized, aching arms and legs. I heard the steel door crash shut. I started breathing again. I hung up there for another long moment. He might come back for some reason. I swung my paralyzed legs down and released my grip on the bars. I sat on the stone steps, fighting for breath. The shed was quiet as a tomb. I could hear my ticker staccato. The worst wasn't over. That all is well whistle had to blow. If it didn't blow, they'd come looking for me with fists, clubs, and guns. I peeped through a crack in the door. I put my ear to it. The yard was bare. I could hear the clatter of steel plates in the mess hall. Finally, all was quiet. The count was going on. I thought, even if the kid goes through with his end, this one night the count screw will poke that dummy to stand up to the cell door. That whistle ain't gonna blow. It's been too long already. Those cold-hearted bastards are on the way already. They'll beat and stomp me crippled. The whistle blew. The beautiful sound of it was like a faucet. I flooded my eyes with tears. I did a dusty jig on the shed floor. It was dusk. It wasn't over. The only way to get over the wall was to scale and climb to the top of a cell house in the far corner of the yard. Lucky for me, the cell house sat in a deep recess. Otherwise, its roof would have towered above the wall. It was the only building close to a section of wall. Other buildings, stairs, stepped almost to the roof of the cell house. Maybe I'd been too eager to escape. I'd not put together a rope or hook. I'd have to use my hands and feet. It sat 6 feet away and 20 feet above the wall. There was only one screw on the wall after the count cleared. He'd be in his cubicle reading the newspaper or a magazine. If he looked up, he couldn't miss seeing me in the glare of the yard lights. My uniform was dark green, stained black with coal dust. Maybe on the street, I'd look like any sooty steel mill or coal worker. I hadn't done too badly so far with short-term planning. I had until midnight to get over the wall and out of the city. I had no scratch. I'd passed out a small fortune in tips to hotel maids, bellhops, and bartenders. Now all of them were rich compared to me. I knew several I could go to and get a few dollars. They could be found at their places of work. There had been all the show-ups the month before and after my conviction. My face would be remembered by the rollers in those neighborhoods. I thought about sweets. I remember his crack at the hideout to set me up for the cop of my stable. I threw him out of my skull. I couldn't trust any of the pimps I knew. I always been a threat to them. Iceberg was really on his own. I'd have to make it to one of Mama's sisters 30 miles away in Indiana. It was now pitch black inside the shed. I raised the hook and pushed the door open. I looked out into the yard. I stepped through the door into the yard. All was quiet. I pushed the door shut. I heard a dull metallic noise. I pulled it toward me. The hook had fallen into its loop. The shed door had hooked from the inside. I thought that freak accident would confound the investigators for sure. I raced to the side of the mess hall. I'd have to get on its flat roof. I took hold of some window bars and pulled up to a standing position on the sill. I reached over and grabbed the drain pipe. I swung over and shinnied up to the roof. I looked to my left. I could see the silhouetted figure of the wall screw in his cubicle. I looked across and up at the cell house roof abutting the wall. It was a long way. I walked across the roof toward the next building. I was near the far edge of the roof. I looked back at the wall cubicle. The screw was out walking the wall. He had that deadly rifle cradled in his arms. I flung myself flat on my back on the black roof. I hoped I was invisible to him. I laid there panting. I wondered what a screw's manual said about an escaping con target. If he saw me, would he scope for a skull, heart, or gut shot? Finally, he went back into the cubicle. Lucky for me, the mess hall roof was connected to the chapel building. The connection was a concrete ledge. It was less than a foot wide and about 12 feet long. My heavy prison brogans seemed as wide as the ledge. They slipped on the glazed ledge. The wild late April winds made the walk as secure as a stroll across a teeter-totter 2 stories above the ground. I stood at the edge of the ledge and looked up. I stretched my right arm up and stood on tiptoes. The chapel roof was 2 feet above my fingertips. I'd have to go back a few feet on that glassy ledge. I'd have to get up enough speed coming back to make a 2-foot leap. I'd have to grab the outside rim of the roof's drain gutter. I wondered if it could stand my weight. I carefully backed up 6 feet. I stood there trembling, looking up at the rim. I looked back. The screw wasn't on the wall. I had to forget how narrow the ledge was. I threw a leg out. I whipped the other toward it. I pumped them over the gritty glaze. I heard the whispering hiss of the leather soles tromping the ledge. My arms were outstretched to the black sky. My eyes were riveted upward to the gutter rim. I leapt upward. I felt my feet soar off the ledge. I taloned the rim. I hung from it dangling in space. My fingernails sent red-hot needles of pain through the tortured flesh at their roots. I chinned up and hurled a leg across the rooftop. I rolled onto it. I lay there gasping as I watched the rifleman walk his beat. He went in. I struggled up the steep, sloping roof to the top. The edge of the cell house roof was 3 feet away. I leapt straight ahead. I flopped on my belly. The tips of my brogans were in the drain gutter. The cell house roof was even steeper. It was coated with squares of slippery shale. I looked up toward the top. It seemed a city block away. I started bellying up it. I dug my brogan tips into the small cracks between the shale squares. I finally inched to the top. My chest was flaming. I lay astraddle the 6-inch top of a double precipice. The 2 sides of the roof formed a steep pyramid. I was on top of it. The 6-inch top seemed as thin as a wire. Through a dizzy haze, I saw the lights of the city winking in an ocean of blackness. I got to my feet. I started walking the tight wire like a circus performer. The winds were savage up here. They kicked and punched me. I teetered and swayed on the wire. I looked down over the right precipice to the street far below. Through a fuzzy blur, I saw auto headlights darting through the night like tiny fireflies. My skull almost blacked out. I jerked my skull away and glued my eyes to the wire. It was like an age before I reached the end of the cell house. If the screw came out now, I'd be in full view. Even from the inside, he could spot me. I stood shivering. I looked down 20 feet to the top of the 3-foot wide wall. I couldn't turn back. I couldn't just stand there. It was a cinch I couldn't expect to keep balance if I hit the wall feet first. I dropped, legs wide open. I heard my trousers rip. The inside concrete edge of the wall top gouged into my inner thigh. My rear end crashed against the concrete. My skull reeled in pain as I sat in the cold saddle. I swung my gouged left leg from the inner side of the wall. I scooted back on my belly to my fingertips. I hung there for a moment. I felt blood running down my left leg into my shoe. I let go. I struck feet first. My butt and back took the rest of the shock. I laid there on my back in a drunken fog of exhaustion, pain, and breathless joy. It was at least 10 minutes before I could stand. I limped away for 100 yards. I turned and looked back at the joint. I thought, those dirty white folks are gonna pace the floor. Their assholes are gonna twitch. They're gonna call me a million black nigger bastards and son of a bitches. One thing they can't deny in their cruel secret hearts, I outsmarted them. It's gonna hurt 'em to the rotten quick that a nigger did a black Houdini out of there. No screws, skulls busted, and no bars sawed. They're gonna foul their chances to catch me after the midnight count. They'll search the yard and joint for a week. Their asses will turn blue. Their skulls won't let 'em believe a nigga was clever enough to ghost out of there. I turned and hobbled toward the state of Indiana. Chapter 19. The Ice Pick. I was lucky. I caught 5 rides to get to my aunt. It was 5 minutes to midnight when she opened the door. At first, she didn't recognize me. She made me welcome. In a week, my leg had healed and I felt strong. Her husband was my size. He gave me an outfit and $50. I went to the horse section of town. A bunch of New Orleans pimps were in town. They had their thieving whores with them. 3 days later, I stole one. Her name was No Thumbs Helen. She was at the time one of the slickest from the person thieves in the country. We got about in the Vol.7 hog. She was a magician. For almost a year, she left a trail of empty wallets across 5 states. We were in Iowa when Helen strung a rich sod butter for $7,200. I was in bed when she threw it on the bed. Excited? Sure I was. My heart boomed like bombs going off. She didn't know it. I was icy cool. I casually scooped it up and counted it. I had a poker face. I said, "Now listen, bitch. Run this thing down. I gotta know how hot this scratch is. Did you get all the sucker had? I'll be a salty son of a bitch to read in the papers that you missed a bundle." Her rundown told me it was best to split. We got in the hog and went to Minneapolis. The second day, I copped a young whore. She wanted to be a thief. I took her to Helen at a hotel. Helen chilled when she saw the pretty bitch. She blew her top. She drew her knife. The young whore fled. I disarmed Helen and punched her around. Helen went to work. I fell asleep. I woke up fast. Helen was jabbing her knife into me. I rolled away. She had stabbed me in the forearm and the side of an elbow. I took a golf club and knocked her out. I never tried to stable her after that. I didn't feel like a real pimp with one whore. I decided to steal the technique of stealing from Helen. I could use it to train other whores when I cut her loose. Finally, I picked her skull. The technique went as follows. She would lurk in some shadowy doorway or alley entrance. When a trick came by, she'd go into a con act. She'd stand wide-legged and bend her knees to an almost squatting stance. She'd whip up the front bottom of her dress. She'd expose the gaping, hairy magnet to the bugging eyes of the sucker. The pull was magnified by her stroking her cat. She'd say to the sucker,
"Please, pretty sweetie, I am so hot, this pussy is burning up. I ain't had no dick in 6 months. Come here and do something about it."
He'd step into the doorway already blind hot to sock it in for free. His instinctive weariness blackjacked to sleep by the raw event. She'd bombard the sucker with a flow of sweetly passionate, sexy bullshit as she tightly embraced him. She had located his wallet, usually in the rear trouser pocket, with the sensitive tips of her fingers. She'd grind her belly against his scrotum. She'd complain that his belt buckle was hurting her. She would be panting in phony passion as she unbuckled it. It would release the tension of his pants pockets. She'd caress the head of his swipe with her fingers. She stroked the tip of his ear with her tongue. The very tips of the airy light index finger and thumb of the free hand flickered the button pocket open. The very tips of the airy light index finger and thumb of the free hand flicked the button pocket open. The index and middle fingers scissored on the wallet and slid it from the pocket. The trick would be excited and hot. He wouldn't have felt the glowing edge of a cigarette on his ass. With both hands behind his neck, she removed the scratch from the hide. She'd up the sexy chatter and the strong grind against his scrotum. She rolled the bills into a tight suppository shape. She slipped the wallet back into the pocket. She wouldn't forget to rebutton the pocket. She was ready to blow the sucker off, get rid of him. She cracked that she had to pee. Stooping quickly, she'd ram the rolled bills up her cat. She'd sight a passing car, she'd fake alarm. She would say,
"Oh my God, there's Riley, the vice cop. Listen, honey, go to the Park Hotel up the street and register as Mr. and Mrs. Jones. I will be there in 10 minutes, pretty daddy. I sure want some of that good dick."
The sucker would pat the reassuring bump of his wallet. It was still there in the button pocket. He'd amble off to the hotel. The thief would make it home. She'd completely change her appearance. She'd go back into the street to sting another sucker. There was an accident. She got pregnant. I found a croaker who made her one again. The game went down as usual. The bubble burst in a small town in Ohio. The skyrocket came crashing down when I ran into an old pal. He was now called New York Joe. I hadn't seen him since I was 14. My mother had taken him in for a few weeks when his widowed mother died. He got sick and had to go to a hospital. I'd take a bus to see him and bring him tidbits. I'd sit with him and console him. I liked him. Our friendship was brief. He got out of the hospital and left town. He was wholesaling cocaine, and the sample he gave me was almost pure. I made an appointment to cop a piece. I didn't know he had learned in New York to cross everybody, even old friends. I found out the stuff he gave me was phony. I rushed back to him, figuring he had made a mistake and would square things. I said, "Joe, you've made a mistake, man." He took me inside. He said, "What's the trouble, Jim?" I said, "Man, this is bullshit. This ain't the same stuff that I sampled." He said, "Well, listen, Ronald went out to the stash. That motherfucker's crossing me." He drew his gun from a shoulder holster. At the time, I didn't know it was all con. He said, "Should I go out there and kill that son of a bitch? What do you want me to do?" He started working his eyes. His eyes were bugging and going through all that crazy act. I said, "No, man, just give me my scratch back." He said, "I'm so mad I can croak you both." I was relatively young. I had never run into this New York stuff before. I was spooked. I said, "Forget about it." He was going through contortions. I was in his town. I had a thief with at least 7 beefs on her. I was out the $3,000. I might have gotten croaked. Later, I knew it was stuff, New York stuff. In later years, I figured it out. He maybe had always hated me because I had more education than he had. A week later, Helen got busted on 7 counts. I signed a hog over to a lip. She got 5 to 10. I should have wired a bomb to that starter before I turned it over to the lip. A stud told me Joe had fingered Helen. He almost ruined me, tapped me out, got my thief busted. He literally ran me out of town broke and with no whore. I heard whore catching was good in Detroit. Detroit was the promised land for pimps, all right. The town was teeming with young, fast whores. The local pimps were soft competition. I was walking, but I was sharp as a Harlem sissy. Anyway, these whores were a different breed than the ones back in the city. They were gullible, and the fellow didn't have to play his heart out to cop them. The first package I copped was a beautiful 17-year-old, green-eyed version of Pepper. Her name was Rachel. I was to keep her 13 years. My next package was a huge, black, dangerous Jasper named Serena. In addition to being a whore, she ran a fast sheet setup for a dozen whores. They tricked out of her joint. Within 8 weeks after I hit Detroit, I was cruising the streets in a sparkling new 48 Fleetwood. I had a fat bankroll. Within 90 days after the Serena cop, I had copped 2 more young broads. A week later, a small-time pimp came to town from Rhode Island. He had a beautiful young whore with him. He was jealous. He followed her in the street. I stalked her. He forgot to follow her. I stole her. I'd had her several months when the town got shaky. The rollers forced Serena out of her joint. I put her in the streets. Then I heard about a small town in Ohio, Lima, that was jumping with good tricks and wide open. I could possibly open up a couple of houses there. My luck was soaring. With my pad rent and a pad apiece for the girls, I needed a tighter setup to cut down my nut. My skull was whirling as I drove the hog to pick up my stable in the street. They got in. I tossed their scratch in the glove compartment. Dawn was breaking as the big hog scooted through the streets. My 5 whores were chattering like drug magpies. I smelled that stink that only a street whore has after a long, busy night. The inside of my nose was raw. It happens when you're a pig for snorting cocaine. My nose was on fire. The stink of those whores and the gangster they were smoking seemed like inevitable knives scraping to the root of my brain. I was in an evil, dangerous mood despite that pile of scratch crammed into the glove compartment. "God damn! Has one of you bitches shit on herself or something?" I bellowed. I flipped the wing window toward me. For a long moment there was silence. Then Rachel, my bottom whore, cracked in the pleasing ass-kissing voice,
"Daddy, baby, that ain't no shit you smell. We've been turning all night. Ain't no bathrooms in those tricks cars we've been flipping out of. Daddy, we sure been humping for you. What you smell is our nasty whore asses."
I grinned widely. Inside, of course. The best pimps keep a steel lid on their emotions. I was one of the iciest. The whores went into fits of giggles at Rachel's shaky witticism. A pimp is happy when his whores giggle. He knows they are still asleep. I coasted the hog into the curb outside the hotel where Kim, my newest, prettiest girl, was cribbing. Jesus, I would be glad to drop the last whore off. I could get to my own hotel to nurse my nose with cocaine and be alone. Any good pimp is his own best company. His inner life is so rich with cunning and scheming to outthink his whores. As Kim got out, I said, "Good night, baby. Today is Saturday. I want everybody in the street at noon instead of 7 tonight." I said noon, not 5 minutes after or 2 minutes after. At 12 sharp, I want you down. Got it, baby? She didn't answer. She did a strange thing. She walked into the street, around the hog to the window on my side. She stood looking at me for a long moment. Her beautiful face tense in the dim dawn. Then in her crisp New England accent, she said,
"Oh, you coming back to my pad this morning? You haven't spent the night with me in a month, so come back, okay?"
A good pimp doesn't get paid for screwing. He gets his payoff for always having the right thing to say to a whore right on lightning tap. I knew my 4 whores were flapping their ears to get my reaction to this beautiful bitch. A pimp with an overly fine bitch in his stable has to keep his game tight. Whores constantly probe for weakness in a pimp. I fitted a scary mask on my face and said, in a low, deadly voice, "Bitch, are you insane? No bitch in this family calls any shots or muscles me to do anything. Now take your stinking yellow ass upstairs to a bath and some shut-eye. Get in the street at noon, like I told you." The bitch just stood there. Her eyes slitted in anger. I could sense she was game to play the string right out there in the street before my horse. If I had been 10 years dumber, I would have leapt out of the hog, broken her jaw, and put my foot in her ass. The joint was too fresh in my mind. I knew the bitch was trying to booby-trap me when she spat out her invitation.
"Come on, kick my ass! What the hell do I need with a man who I only see when he comes to get his money? I am sick of it all! I don't dig stables and I never will! I know I'm the new bitch who has to prove herself. Well, goddammit! I am sick of this shit! I'm cutting out!"
She stopped for air and lit a cigarette. I was going to blast her ass off when she finished. I just sat there staring at her. Then she went on.
"I have turned more tricks in 3 months I have been with you than in the whole 2 years with Paul. My pussy stays sore and swollen. Do I get my ass kicked before I split? If so, kick it now, because I'm going back to Providence on the next thing smoking."
She was young, fast with trick appeal galore. She was a pimp's dream and she knew it. She had tested me with her beef. She was laying back for a sucker response. I disappointed her with my cold overlay. I could see her wilt as I said in an icy voice, "Listen, square-ass bitch, I have never had a whore I couldn't do without. I celebrate, bitch, when a whore leaves me. It gives some wormy bitch a chance to take her place to be a star. You scurvy bitch, if I shit in your face, you gotta love it and open your mouth wide." The rollers cruised by in a squad car. I flashed a sucker smile on my face. I cooled it until they passed. Kim was rooted there wincing under the blizzard. I went on ruthlessly. "Bitch, you are nothing but a funky zero. Before me, you had one chili chump with no rep. Nobody except his mother ever heard of the bastard. Yes, bitch, I'll be back this morning to put your phony ass on the train." I rocketed away from the curb. In the rear-view mirror, I saw Kim walk slowly into the hotel. Her shoulders were slumped. Until I dropped the last whore off, you could have heard a mosquito crapping on the moon. I had tested out for them solid ice. I went back for Kim. She was packed and silent. On the way to the station, I riffled the pages in that Pimp's book in my head. I searched for an angle to hold her without kissing her ass. I couldn't find a line in it for an out like that. As it turned out, the bitch was testing and bluffing right down the line. We had pulled into the station parking lot when the bitch fell to pieces. Her eyes were misty when she yelped,
"Daddy, are you really going to let me split? Daddy, I love you!"
I started the prat action to cinch her when I said, "Bitch, I don't want a whore with rabbit in her. I want a bitch who wants me for life. You have got to go. After that bullshit earlier this morning, you are not that bitch." The prat butchered her. She collapsed into my lap crying and begging to stay. I had a theory about splitting whores. They seldom split without a bankroll. So I cracked on her. "Give me that scratch you held out and maybe I'll give you another chance." Sure enough, she reached into her bosom. She drew out close to 5 bills and handed it to me. No pimp with a brain in his head cuts loose a young, beautiful whore with lots of mileage left in her. I let her come back. At long last, I was driving toward my hotel. I remember what Sweet Jones, the master pimp who turned me out, had said about whores like Kim.
"Slim,"
He had said,
"a pretty nigga bitch and a white whore are just alike. They both will get in the stable to wreck it and leave the pimp on his ass with no whore. You gotta make 'em hump hard and fast to stick 'em for the long scratch quick. Slim, pimpin' ain't no game of love, so prat 'em and keep your swipe out of them. Any sucker who believes a whore loves him shouldn't have fell out of his mammy's ass."
My mind went back to Pepper, then back even further, and I remembered what he had said about the Georgia.
"Slim, a pimp is really a whore who has reversed the game on whores. So Slim, be as sweet as the scratch, no sweeter, and always stick a whore for a bundle before you sex her. A whore ain't nothing but a trick to a pimp. Don't let 'em Georgia you. Always get your money in front just like a whore."
I was on the elevator riding to my pad. I thought about the first bitch who had Georgia'd me when I was 3. She had flim-flammed me out of my head. She would be old and gray now. If I could find her, I would sure get that bitch's unpaid account off my conscience. I snorted a couple of caps of cocaine. 2 hours later, I took a yellow. I fell asleep. When I woke up at noon, I knew I had to make a move. Rachel's parents were trying to cross me. Kim might split back to the sucker. My whole stable, except Kim, were local girls. A pimp is asking for trouble when he doesn't move his action away. Control is easier and tighter away from the familiar setting. A girl in strange surroundings depends more on her man. She needs his advice and guidance more. Girls copped in smaller towns have to be moved fast. That night I went to Ohio. I put down the foundation for the move. I rented 2 houses and furnished them beautifully. I made contact with a fellow who collected the oil for the heat. I got the okay to go at a C a week for each house. I moved my whole family there. I was just in time. A month later, Detroit folded and the lid slammed down. There was a good dope connection in the new town. I started capping H with my C. I'd mix them and shoot speedballs. When I went to bed, I got sound sleep. I seldom had those bad dreams. I got hooked on H. It didn't worry me. I was getting long scratch. I was 30 years old. For the second time in my pimping career, I could see solid success and lots of long green in my future. How could I know that elephant bitch, Serena, would get jealous? She brought the whole greenback house of cards crashing down around me. I missed a murder rap by a fraction of an inch. The fraction was in Serena's chest. Within the year that I had set up my houses, tricks from all over the country were beating a path to them. They were wild to sample those luscious young freaks. Pimping had never been better. I was in a wonderful mood as I walked in the sunshine. I noticed Serena was coming up the street with a sack of groceries in her arm. She had croaked 2 people in New Orleans. She walked toward me, smiling. When she got close to me, she got the ice pick out of the sack. She jabbed it toward my chest. At the time, I was quite quick, so I leapt back. The point of it slashed the edge of my pocket right over my ticker. She was trying to drive the point right through my ticker. I was without a pistol at the time. I could buy a pistol from any hardware store. I bought a .32 and a box of 50 bullets. I took it up to her pad and loaded it at the kitchen table. She said,
Daddy, what's that for?
I said, that's to croak any bitch that tries to hurt me. She said,
Oh, Daddy, you know I was just upset. Forget about it.
I said, no, I'm not going to forget about it. I'd kill my own mother if I thought she was going to hurt me. Later that evening, about midnight, the other girls and I were returning from a cabaret. I put the key in the door. I opened it and smelled the heavy odor of taboo, the heavy scent that only Serena used. I hesitated. My eyes became accustomed to the gloom. I saw Serena standing over the corner of the living room with an ice pick in her hand. She had slipped into Rachel's house through an open basement window. I drew my gun. I said, Serena! She said,
Yes, motherfucker. I'm killing you and them whores this morning.
She started crying. I said, Serena, don't come by that end table. If you do, I'm going to kill you. You know I always keep my word. She said,
I wouldn't give a motherfuck.
She lunged past the end table. I shot her. When I shot her, the only thing that saved her life was the fact that she had a 46-inch bust. The fatty tissue absorbed the bullet at almost point-blank range. When I shot her, blood spattered. I struck her in an artery. It blew all over my face, all over her. Her dress had a ringlet of sparks. I set her on fire. She had elephant toughness. It didn't even knock her down. The bitch grabbed at me. She had dropped the ice pick. She grabbed her chest and said,
Daddy, don't kill me.
I was tempted. I really intended to kill her. I started to shoot her through the head. I didn't. I don't really know why, except there were witnesses. Those 4 whores. She staggered past us, through the door and down the street. We all got into the Fleetwood and raced out of town, leaving everything. I sped toward Mama. I hadn't seen her since that Christmas visit. Her hair was snow white. Jesus, was she excited and happy to see me. I told her what had happened. She got a friend to drive her back there. She loaded all the clothing on a trailer. She visited Serena in the hospital. Serena begged my mother to tell me to come back. She wouldn't file charges. It was all her fault and she loved me. I knew that if I had gone back, Serena would have driven a butcher knife through my heart in my sleep. We have reached the end of this portion of the miniseries on Ralph Reads. I would like, or rather love, to thank you, queens and kings, fellow royalty, for stopping by. You may connect with me via Facebook. Send a friend request, while you still can, to Ralph Anthony Garcia. On Twitter and Instagram, follow me at RGMC2407. Send an email to RGMC2407@gmail.com, where if you would like to leave a donation, please use the Zelle app or PayPal.me/RGMC2407 or Cash App. My cash tag is RGMC2407. You may also connect with me on my other channel, my music channel, RGMC, Ralph Garcia, Master of Ceremonies, and right here on the Alternative Podcasting Channel, TURN, the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Fellow royalty, pick up a good book, read a good story, and set your good self free. I appreciate you and I love you like cooked food. I will see you folks for the conclusion of the Iceberg Slim miniseries on Ralph Reed's. Stay chill and be cool, because if you look for trouble, it'll certainly find you.